President Luis Inacio Lula da Silva's participation in the CELAC Summit of Latin American Leaders this week, less than a month after taking office, marked Brazil's efforts to resume a leading role in the region and counter the influence of the U.S. Lula, as he's popularly known, used the occasion to turn the host city of Buenos Aires, Argentina, upside down when he became the first and thus far only member of the BRICS group of nations to criticize Russia's role in the war in Ukraine, comparing it to the U.S. hybrid war against Venezuela. The returning Brazilian president was reported as saying, quote, "In the same way that I am against territorial occupation as Russia did to Ukraine, I am against too much interference in the Venezuelan process," closed quote. That statement followed a period where the U.S. government, from the White House to the congressional leadership and security services such as the CIA, threw their support behind the new president of Brazil, warning the outgoing Jair Bolsonaro to stand down the challenge by his supporters to what they called a stolen election. To try to make sense out of all of this, we go to Esteli, Nicaragua, to speak with journalist and political analyst Stephen Sefton. So I was surprised and not surprised to hear that from Lula. I was wondering, and we discussed this earlier, what was coming down the pike when we saw the Biden administration and it's CIA, I believe, also, as if there's any space between them, in the bag for Lula in the post-election, mud wrestling in Brazil. There was no question that of them throwing with Bolsonaro. They were clearly with Lula, and I was wondering what had happened since they forced the locals to throw Lula into prison to keep him out of office, got Dilma Rousseff tossed out of office, and suddenly they're best friends. And we see this thing. Are we looking at basically a co-opting of the post-Chavez movements for self-determination, integration, sovereignty, and turning it into sort of a new administration of the empire?
Yeah, and Don, I tend to sympathize with that point of view, right or wrong. But there are lots of kind of things that there are various nuances to it. And Lula, who knows, and Lula has developed over the years, and I think it's a mistake to think that the Lula of today is the same Lula of 15 years ago or 2000. When did he win his first period of office? 2006.
Yeah, ways back. Yeah.
And so he's not the same politician now as he is then. I know, to state the obvious, really. But what does that mean? And as you point out, and as I think I remarked in our last conversation, it's simply absurd to think that Lula would have won the election, which he did, against Jair Bolsonaro, right, not by a very narrow margin, if he hadn't had the help and backing of a big chunk of the Brazilian elite. And that Brazilian elite is obviously part of the Brazilian political scene that is very sympathetic to the U.S. Democrat Party.
Right.
So what does that mean? It's not. There's no straightforward answer to that, because, for example, you get Lula saying, as he did the other day, comparing, or he compared the U.S. and European hybrid war against Venezuela.
Right.
He seemed to draw a parallel between that and what he termed the Russian occupation of Ukraine.
Right. And there's an interesting contradiction there, because during Bolsonaro's administration, when the United States was touring the world, twisting arms, looking for condemnation from everyone they can of Russia's position there, the BRICS countries, including Bolsonaro's Brazil, stood back. They gave a little lip service, maybe a vote here and there, but they did not join that bandwagon, and that surprised me too, by the way. But
right.
But I mean, there was that contradiction, and now it seemed like, I don't know, Lula got at least one foot in where Bolsonaro had pulled one out.
Yeah, but then again, and I think one of the key things, it's much too simple to say, oh, well, CELAC's just going to turn into a kind of neo-colonial tool managed at one remove by the elites in Europe and North America. And I think it's much too simple. That's much too simplistic, because even the right wing that tends to sympathize with the United States foreign policy and tends to serve United States policy, and they have the dilemma of that their economic interests are not served. Their economic interests are served much better by working with China. And you can see that again with Lula. And Lula's just had a meeting with the very right-wing leader of Uruguay, Lacal Pou.
Right.
And they're talking about, and you may recall in previous conversation we talked about the internal divisions and arguments inside Mercosur, which consists of Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay and Uruguay, because Uruguay wants to negotiate a bilateral treaty with China, and which is against Mercosur's rules. But in the meeting that Lula just had with Lacal Pou, Lula mooted the idea of discussing precisely a Mercosur-China free trade agreement.
Right.
So you have this kind of mixed messaging coming out of the region's main leaders. You know, Alberto Fernandez, for example, will apparently take a stand in defense of Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner when she's under attack from the right-wing institution, the right-wing controlled institutions, especially the judiciary, of course, in Argentina. But then he'll kind of go out of his way to make nicey nice with the United States over other issues. And one of the things that I thought was very telling about the CELAC summit and confirmed my kind of pessimistic outlook, my generally pessimistic outlook for the future of CELAC as a body embodying the Patria Grande, the emancipation of Latin America finally from North American and European colonial interventions, when President Maduro of Venezuela decided not to participate because he couldn't be sure that there wouldn't be some kind of attempt by under the Argentine legal system to make a move against him on the basis of the measures that have been introduced against him by the United States. So Alberto Fernandez could not guarantee the integrity and the free participation of President Maduro in the CELAC summit in Buenos Aires. What does that mean?
Yeah.
You know, and so and then of course you've got the kind of the can't quite make up his mind. Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, who 1 minute is saying he's criticizing the United States for being interventionist, and the next thing is he's recommending to the region to reach some kind of trade and economic accommodation with North America. Right. So, and we're in a moment of a lot of uncertainty, my feeling is that we're likely to see CELAC becoming a kind of stultifying rather than an emancipatory body in the short term. That may change in the future, but certainly in the short term, I see its influence as being mainly stultifying, in sharp contrast to the extraordinary dynamism that it had when Comandante Eterno Hugo Chavez was alive. Yeah. One good thing that came out of the CELAC summit was that Ralph Gonsalves, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, now has the pro tempore presidency of CELAC, and that's encouraging. But given the sheer weight and economic power of Mexico, Brazil and Argentina, it's hard to see how even somebody with a lot of vision like Ralph Gonsalves is going to make much headway developing CELAC as a truly independent regional body.
We're gonna have to watch that develop over the coming year as they close that conference out for this year. Stephen, thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thanks a million, Don. Look forward to it.
For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.